I'd like to take care of some technical issues. If I could be made the host, that would be really helpful for me because I'm going to share some slides later on.
Doing my best here.
Yeah, take your time. Take your time. I don't need it just yet. So I just at some point.
Should be able to share screen. Is that enough?
Share screen. Yeah, yeah. Or let's see. Oh, okay. I can do that. Yep. I see that. I've got that possibility. So good. I'd like to start out by first offering a gratitude to the Nebraska Zen Center. I'm really grateful to be in this particular interim position, and it's given me an opportunity to flex my wings, my teaching wings, in a way that I haven't had a chance up until this point. So much gratitude. I'd also like to offer gratitude to my teacher, just to think about her, Diane Benage, who's presently living in assisted living. So I want to shout out some gratitude to my teacher, who I owe a great deal of debt to, for also being in this particular seat. I'm going to be visiting her during the week of the last week of the year in Pennsylvania. And I'd also like to send my gratitude out to Nonan. Without him, I don't think any of us would be here with us in one way or the other. And also to my own the Sangha here in Ames, the Zen Fields Sangha. When we communicate with each other, the more I get to know you all and what's important to you, all of that communication waters seeds in me and informs me on what to share with you in one way or the other, in one way or another. If not directly, then indirectly in some way. So I am more than happy to hear directly from you, and to know you, to get to know you, to get to know like what's important to you. That's gonna, because my Dharma talks are based on what people are sharing with me. All right, what I'm going to share today is based on what I've heard from folks in Iowa, as well as folks in Nebraska. And so I want to encourage each of you, if you feel so moved, to connect with me and share, like, what's important to you? What do you want to know about regarding the Dharma? That's what feeds me, and that's what feeds what I share. And like I mentioned, it'll be either directly or indirectly. Right? What I share here is either coming directly from what I've heard from people, what people are wanting to hear, or indirectly, as well as from my own interests, of course. And so while we're not together in the same space all of the time, I just want to extend that invitation to email, to text me. We can set up times to share. There is a Taoist text that I've been looking at lately called the Zhuangzi. When you're really stressed out, I've found that Taoism is a great antidote to dealing with some of the stressors that we have in our society. There's a story that opens the Zhuangzi Where Zhuangzi, this is the name of a sage, Zhuangzi. He shares that he has a dream of a butterfly. He dreams that he is a butterfly. Imagine that. He's dreaming that he is a butterfly. And when he wakes up, he has this interesting question that arises for him in his mind. He wonders if he had a dream of a butterfly, or the butterfly is having the dream of Zhuangzi. He's wondering that in his mind. And we might wonder, the benefit of this kind of a story is to allow us to also use our imagination and to be able to see the world from multiple perspectives. Just like when we are with somebody that we care about deeply, and we start to have a conversation, we start to connect with them, we do things with them, we experience things through the eyes of the other person. And I'll give you a few examples from my own life. Certainly being with children. If you're an adult, if you're with children, our minds merge with the minds of the children, and we start to see things through their eyes. We see a whole different world opens up, a whole different world of possibilities opens for us that we would not have conceived of otherwise if we just stayed in our own little isolated worlds. There was a nun, Shonen Bressler, that would come and visit with us at Mount Equity Zendo when I was in training. She would come visit us from time to time, and Shonen had training in the Rinzai school of Zen, but she had met my teacher Diane in Japan at the Nisodo, because at that time she was considering ordaining, and she was considering ordaining with Oyama Roshi, one of my teachers. And Oyama Roshi wasn't didn't feel comfortable doing that. She didn't feel like she had the resources to do it. So she found her way to the Rinzai school and ordained with a Rinzai master and trained with him assiduously for, I think, maybe around a decade before returning to the United States. And she presently lives in Berkeley, California. But she would travel every so now and again. And what's unique about Shona, I mean, she's a wonderful person, but what's unique also about her is that she's blind. She's legally blind, and I had the experience, the pleasure, the not the pleasure, the yes, the pleasure and the privilege to walk with her places, both in Pennsylvania where I was when she would come, or in California when on the couple occasions that I visited her there. And inevitably, our minds would merge on some level, and I would be seeing things through the eyes of somebody who couldn't see. And all of a sudden, my ears were more activated. Another example I want to give is of a Jesse McKinney. Daikon is his Dharma name. He passed away just a couple of years ago now, and he had a really severe form of cerebral palsy. So much so that it affected not only his ability to walk, but his ability to speak. And yet he could communicate. He can communicate. He wrote at least 2 books writing with his head. He had a baseball cap and a metal wand attached to his baseball cap, and he would type in the keyboards like this, one letter at a time. And the times, again, when I was with him, on some level, our minds would merge. And I would be able to see, there was multiple occasions that I went to his home, and I would, part of my job was there, not simply being a spiritual guide, but also a caretaker, taking him to the bathroom, feeding him, these kinds of things, having a conversation. And our minds would merge on some level. And all of a sudden, I felt this incredible, incredible gratitude for being able to walk, for being able to speak, because of being in his presence. It's like you all of a sudden you realize the miracle of walking, of the things that we take for granted. When I was with a friend who was blind, you realize the miracle of sight in a way that you just don't see when you're not around certain people. Or with children, the miracle of the wonderment of every moment. And so Zhuangzi's butterfly dream is a way of opening us up to, it's asking us to be open to multiple perspectives on things. How does the Buddha, how does the Buddha see? That, I think that's really where this is going. It's like the Buddha is able, the Buddha is able to see things from multiple angles. And if you read the sutras, especially the Mahayana sutras, it talks explicitly about the Buddha's omniscience, all knowing, to be able to see things from multiple viewpoints. And to me, I equate this is my equation, this being able to view things from multiple viewpoints. I equate that with unconditional love. And maybe I'll be able to communicate that. But how do we how do we see how do we see how would we see things if we looked from different perceptions, different perspectives? It requires us to move out of our own encased worldviews. It demands, if we're going to see something from another person's perspective, we need to be willing to let go of our own, at least momentarily. If we want to see through the eyes of another person, then we need to let go of our own views momentarily and enter into a whole different world. So whole other worlds are awaiting for us. There's not one world. That's a thing that we often think, is that there's one world that we live in that we all share. And if we come at it from this view of multiple perspectives, there's no such thing as one world. But there's multiple worlds, and we have this opportunity when we're practicing. By practice, I mean entering into the worldview of another person. When we merge minds with another person, a whole nother world opens up to us that we didn't see before. There's the potential there for hundreds of thousands of worlds to for us to open up to, if we can get out of our small self thinking. Right? And that's what practice, I think, is about, is recognizing the small self view and willingness to open up to the perspectives of others, to see things through another view. Last time, we looked at the Samanphala Sutta, the story about King Ajatasattu. Maybe some of you remember. And I mentioned the four jhanas. Those are the things that, these states of mind, the fruits of contemplation. King Ajatasattu had done some horrible things, including murdering his own father, dividing up the Buddha's Sangha, and then he had the nerve to come to the Buddha and ask him for guidance after doing all of these things. And the Buddha was very obliging in offering him, sharing in a deep conversation about the fruits of the practice. And And one of the things that he brings up is these four jhanas that we mentioned. The first one being joy and ease, the second one being rapture, right? Um, Rapture being this non-intellectual, non-rational, non-linear state of mind that we can enter into when we do zazen, right? Letting go of the flow of the thoughts, of the linear thoughts, where the mind likes to link thoughts together and create a story. It's the cutting up of those links, right? Letting them swim free association of thoughts. It's rapture. At least that's how I understand it. When one abandons rapture, they enter into the third jhana, which is subtle happiness. And maybe one way to think about that in the Zen context is body and mind drop away. Body and mind, there's a letting go of conceptual thinking. That's abandoning rapture, entering into subtle happiness. And then the fourth state, abandoning happiness, abandoning happiness and entering into equanimity. What Nonan would say, how I associate this, Nonan would say, when we do Zazen, it's like we start at the bottom of the ocean, right? In other traditions of Buddhism, there's stages, starting at the top of the ocean, and you gradually work your way down to the bottom of the ocean. But in Zazen and Shikantaza, we start at the bottom of the ocean. And maybe we work our way up to the top. King Ajat, the point I want to make here, right? We've kind of just a brief review of these jhana states and the fruits of practice, and this is what King Ajatasattu is desiring to understand. And once he gets to some level of trust with the Buddha, he does something really interesting. It was unexpected when I read through the sutra. I didn't read through deeply the whole thing, but I wanted to see, how does this end between King Ajatasattu and the Buddha? How does this end? Because if there's no grievance process there for King Ajatasattu. He just did these horrible things. He's mentally ill. How does the sutta end? And I was just overjoyed to hear the ending. Listen, he says, I go to the Blessed One for refuge. I go to the Blessed One for refuge, to the Dharma and the community. In other words, I now take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha, the three refuges. I now take, these are the first three, these are part of the 16 precepts. He says, then he says further, a transgression has overcome me, Lord, speaking to the Buddha. A transgression has overcome me, Lord, in that I was so foolish, so muddle-headed, and so unskilled as to kill my father, a righteous man, a great king, for the sake of sovereign rulership. Listen to that. He has acknowledged his wrongdoings. He is effectively repenting of what he had done. I was so foolish, so muddle-headed, and so unskilled as to kill my father, a righteous man, a great king, for the sake of sovereign rulership. May the Blessed One please accept this confession of my transgression as such, so that I may restrain myself in the future. This is such a beautiful statement from King Ajatasattu, and it's his saving grace. He recognizes his bad deeds, and he confesses them to the Buddha. And this is the practice, actually, that we are also are doing when we're doing Zazen. If Zazen doesn't include, if our practice doesn't include this kind of confession, not that we are, right, this is pretty extreme, but this is an invitation, I should say. This is an invitation for us also to keep in mind the power of confession. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be to a priest necessarily. It could be, and that could be very powerful, but in your practice to recognize the presence of the Buddha and to make confession of whatever it is that you feel you have come short of in some way, or you've done where you have broken the precepts in some way. Right? It's not self-flagellation. It's just opening to the Buddha and saying, you know what, I did these things. And then he says, may the Blessed One accept this confession of my transgression as such, so that I may restrain myself in the future. So the point of confession is not to beat oneself up, rather it's to prevent oneself from doing that same thing again. It weakens. When we confess openly, it weakens, and this is the power of the precept ceremony, of the end of the full moon ceremony, when we recognize things that we could do better and we confess them, either explicitly to the sangha, or to a teacher, or in your own spiritual practice to the Buddha. When we openly confess, it has the effect of helping us not doing those things again in the future, or not to be, in the case of King Ajatasattu, not to be pulled by the lure of power. And in a sense, I would suggest this is the starting point for our practice. There is an implicit trust in the Buddha by King Ajatasattu. The fact that he could eventually see himself going to the Buddha, he trusts the Buddha, right? He trusts the Buddha partly because the Buddha has made the vow to not harm. The Buddha's not going to come back at him and say, "Oh, you know," and call him all kinds of expletives. The Buddha meets him and keeps the precepts. The Buddha meets him, and this is this unconditional love of the Buddha. Whatever it is that King Ajatasattu says to him, the Buddha receives it, right? And he's following the precepts. The precepts, I think, here equal unconditional love. It says, let me hear what you have to repent, right? And not only does the Buddha hear this confession, but he also obliges him by offering him the Dharma. And that's one of the precepts too, is not to begrudge the Dharma to anyone, even somebody who's a murderer, even somebody who's a criminal. There's a story my teacher shared of a story she heard from one of her teachers, Oyama Roshi. Oyama Roshi, she trained with her in the women's monastery for 8 years. And Oyama Roshi she was as a young girl, maybe around 4 years of age. Her family could not afford to take care of her, and so they gave her to an aunt that was a Buddhist nun. And so she, from a very young age, she started to learn how to be a nun. And her aunt, apparently, to get her to behave, she would tell her, if you misbehave, then the Buddha's mudra, I think this is the story, but the Buddha's mudra, his cosmic mudra on the altar, would collapse, something like that, right? That some part of the Buddha statue that she would go and pay homage to every day, or give water to, or food to, that it would change. His facial expression would change. He would be unhappy with you, and his mudra would change. So inevitably, being a young child, she would do things that were disagreeable, or for lack of a better word, bad. And then she would go see the Buddha and see if his complexion would change or his mudra would change. And she would looked at the statue and she saw it didn't change. in those instances. This is another example of that her aunt, the nun, using a skillful means to teach her the unconditional love of the Buddha. That our measuring stick is not as long, is not as wide as the Buddha's measuring stick. Whose measuring stick, whose evaluation stick are we using when we self-reflect? Whose measuring stick are we using? Are we using the Buddha's measuring stick of unconditional love? Or are we using society's measuring stick? Or are we using our measuring stick? Our measuring stick might be only this small, this big. Buddha's measuring stick goes beyond, goes much beyond that. There's another story of this kind of unconditional love of the Buddha, of monkey. There's all kinds of stories in the Indian tradition about monkey. And monkey had these special powers. He could jump so far. When he jumped, he can jump miles and miles and do flip turns in the air, or flips in the air, and go from one part of the world to another part of the world. And monkey said he was so angry. This is the thing about monkey. He's symbolic of the monkey mind. His mind would go all over the place. And of course, monkey would get angry, and he said, I want to get out of the palm of the Buddha's hand. The Buddha says everybody's in his palm, in the palm of the Buddha's hand. Everybody lives in the palm of the Buddha's hand. A monkey said, I'm going to get out of this palm of the Buddha's hand. And so he ran and he jumped as high as he could, and he did all kinds of flips and jumped thousands and thousands of miles, and he landed. He said, there, now I'm out of the Buddha's hand. And he went from the palm of the Buddha's hand, he made it over to the thumb of the Buddha's hand. So he wasn't actually out of the hand of the Buddha. And the same is true for us too. We're never, no matter what we do, we are always in the palm of the Buddha, the hand of the Buddha. We're always in the hand of the Buddha. Okay. One of my early teachers, Tara Brach, maybe some of you have heard of Tara Brach. She's a very famous Buddhist teacher. And I got to practice with her when I was living in Maryland, where my parents are. I got to practice with her and her Sangha in DC, in Washington, DC for several months. And I really respect her, what she has done there. And she talks about something called the trance of unworthiness, that we get into this trance of unworthiness where we don't see ourselves as worthy of the love, unconditional love of the Buddha. Now you can put whatever spin you want on that word Buddha, right? Unconditional love of and fill in the blank there. However you understand Buddha. But in any case, what prevents us from experiencing that love is that we enter in she calls the trance of unworthiness. We think we're not worthy of love. And as I think about this trance of unworthiness, there may be a few things that keep us trapped in this trance of unworthiness. Past trauma might be one thing. Something happened to us in our past, and that prevents us. It kind of holds us into this trance of unworthiness. We're not worthy of experiencing this unconditional love. Or maybe it's simply seeing ourselves in the world as two separate things. There's me, and then there's the world. And that's in Buddhism. We talk about that as delusion. Or also, these things are all connected. But the third thing I'm thinking of is we have this rigid view. We have this rigid view of ourselves, of and we've somehow lost our sense of, we've disconnected from our purity, our pure nature. So I'd like to share this slideshow I created for you. Another Taoist story. So this is from chapter 18 of the Tao Te Ching, and the illustrations you'll find here are from Chinese man named, I believe he's Chinese, C.C. Tsai. Translations are by Brian Bruya. This is entitled Regression into Morality. Regression into Morality. This is chapter 18 of the Tao Te Ching. In the early days of civilization, people were simple and honest. They couldn't read and they didn't know much, but at the same time, they weren't greedy or dishonest. As time went by, people became more and more cunning. As a result, government leaders were forced to use their intelligence to create a legal system to keep the people in line. This is when hypocrisy and deceit arose. So look, the governor is saying there, I'll have to use my head to keep him from evading taxes. And then the subject says, I'll have to use my head to avoid paying taxes. One thing, as soon as you start creating rules, you get somebody else trying to break them. Right? The two happen simultaneously. If you're going to have a rule, like the precepts, you're going to have somebody else trying to break them. This is not the spirit of the precepts, by the way. Right? It's that precepts are asking us to return to that original nature, to that pure mind, before scheming thoughts arise. Originally, families were happy and their members got along very well with each other. There was no need for such concepts as respecting one's elders or loving one's children. But when family relationships began to break down, virtues such as these became important. Be nice, respect your elders, behave yourselves. When the country was still pure and innocent, government ministers all did what they were supposed to, and there was no such thing as a loyal minister. They're all my ministers. But when the country fell into chaos and ministers began scheming among themselves, the label loyal minister became necessary. This man is my only loyal minister. And the footnote says here, kindness and morality, knowledge and intelligence, respecting elders and loving one's children, loyal ministers, these concepts all came about after the Tao was forsaken, after simplicity was destroyed. Their premise is an indication of moral bankruptcy, of the degeneration of people's hearts. They are evidence of regress rather than progress in society. This is kind of such a different view of what we take around ethics, but it's imploring us to return to our original state, our pure mind. And we refer to those as the three pure precepts. Right? The first one is do nothing that is evil. The second one is do everything that is good. And the third one is, there's two translations. One of them is purify the mind. That's the original. And then that became save all beings. Purify the mind. Right? So how do we get back to the Tao? How do we get back to the place of the non-dual? Because if we use these precepts, do no harm, and are clubbing ourselves for not doing any harm, for doing something wrong or doing harm, then we've regressed. Right? We need to return to the Tao, return to the original state. All right. Here's some things to consider. I'm just going to close this up here. Don't wait for conditions to improve. We think things are going to get better sometime in the future, or if we only change something about something, everything will be better. Don't wait for the right person to come along to make your life better. Every moment is a possibility to return to this purity of the Tao. My teacher, when Diane Benaj, when she would go into the prisons in particularly Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and in the last couple of years that she did that, I accompanied her, and she would tell me prior to going in, she said, "I don't judge these men. They're getting judged all of the time by society. Society has made a judgment about these men." And I tell them that, I say, society has judged you, but you can change at any moment. You can change your life around at any moment. You don't have to wait for your circumstances to change, the right people to come along. Every moment is an opportunity to change, to return. And I think we can all learn from that as well, for us too. So I want to close this talk with a poem that I've written. I've entitled Unconditional. Zhuangzi dreamed of a butterfly. Or did the butterfly dream him? You dream of being Buddha. Or Buddha dreaming you. In either case, wake up to this dream.
Thank you very much. Do you have time for some questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. In the beginning, you said that you turned to the Tao for stress relief, but I didn't hear, and I'm sorry if I didn't hit me over the head, how this relates to stress relief.
Mm. Yeah. Well, this time of year in particular, we're in kind of a stressful time. Just the fact that we are meeting our families, there's presents that need to be purchased, for example, but that's just the small of it. We go to visit people that maybe we haven't seen for a while. Maybe our relationships are shaky. There's a lot of movement, a lot of traveling. All of this creates a tremendous amount of stress at the end of the year. And I think most of us, especially if we're kind of sensitive to it, we can feel that stress. And so keeping in mind the teachings of Taoism, of the Tao, I think can help tremendously in keeping our perspective open, because the stress is caused by staying locked into our own perspective. When we stay locked in our own perspective of things, it prevents us from seeing the perspective of another person. And so when I was mentioning Shonen Bressler, the blind nun, I was mentioning Daikon McKinney, the person with cerebral palsy, and it's important that we merge our minds with the people that were around us and try to see things from another perspective. Try to enter into the other person's world, and a whole world can open up. And when we, so I equate that opening up of the worlds to stress relief.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for, that's a good clarifying question. Yeah.
Anyone else have questions? Thoughts?
Yeah, and folks online too. I see Carol Lee and Navab. Thank you all for joining us online too.
People must be busy thinking about all of their holiday obligations.
As have we. We've been this morning. I'm really grateful. I cleared my schedule for this next week. I usually have, well, my my community college classes, world religions, has ended, and I took everything off the schedule as far as morning zazen and other things that I do with Zen Fields, clear the space, and Jisho and I were planning out this coming year. And and I'm so grateful for it. We are sitting down and we're looking at our calendar a whole year out and trying to figure out when are we going to do this? When are we going to do this? When are we going to do this? We got a lot of things in the works here. So for me, yeah, we just celebrated Christmas yesterday with my in-laws here in Ames, and next Saturday we leave for Maryland to celebrate Christmas with my family in Maryland, my parents in Maryland, and then we'll visit with my teacher as well. So yeah, it's a time for break, but also a time to re-engage with people that we haven't seen in a while. And
I have a question, if I could.
yeah.
How much it's going to relate to the topic is more something that came up while I was sitting. So, like at the beginning of my sit, I had just a lot of. It felt very positive, and then towards the end, I felt kind of this darkness come over, and trying to be with that both light and dark. It's easy to be with the stuff that feels good, but when you feel like whether it's a dark energy or thought or whatever, I know for me, like I struggle what to do with that. Is there something to do with that? Like you gotta get rid of it or be with it and like sit with it. How do you relate to bringing in not just the light but the dark and kind of integrating them together as a whole?
Yeah, without knowing more of the context of that, I hesitate to say, well, this is what you should do. Yeah, I would need to know more, a little bit more there, because so one side of me wants to say, well, there is ways to work with that. It's not like we have to sit with darkness because it's there. We have to question whether is it something, is it a habitual rut that our mind goes to regularly? And if that's the case, maybe it's unnecessary to sit with it. Maybe there's some tools we can use to turn that around. Maybe we're not sitting deeply enough or allowing ourselves, like I've mentioned, to experience the unconditional love of the Buddha. So is it a habitual thing that we could possibly change? Or is there, and it's not necessarily based in something that's happening in the present moment, or is it something that keeps popping up as a result of something unresolved, right? If it's that, and it's calling for our attention, then maybe it's calling us to think about this thing outside of Zazen and be like, maybe I should give some attention to X, Y, and Z because it keeps popping up. Because Zazen is just a reflection of our life as a whole. And it's going to, Zazen by itself is neither good nor bad. It's a mirror. It's a mirror for, one way to see it is that it's a mirror for our whole life. And what's going on in our life will inevitably arise in our Zazen. And so it's an opportunity then for us to take stock. And one of the things that you can do is to look at how well, you've been working with the precepts. Have you, and have you been studying them, and how do the precepts, how might they inform what you need to be doing? I think that's the question to maybe ask, is like, how do these 16 precepts inform the rest of my life? Because your Zazen is directly affected by your ability to be in accord with those precepts. In fact, we say that Zazen and the precepts are one. So if you're not feeling like your if you're sensing that something's off in Zazen, right? If you're sensing that something is off in Zazen, well, maybe sometimes we have to look at the rest of our life and say, how am I living in accord? Where am I off with the precepts? Now that could be a possible entrance way into whatever is happening. Sitting with stuff that is negative could possibly be, we have to be careful there too, because we don't want to create a habit of experiencing dark emotions if they're not based in something that's actually happening in your life. But sometimes we do go to a place. Sometimes we're thrust into a place where our chi, our energy is just low. And then in that case, Zazen could be a wonderful place to explore the unconditional love of experiencing that dark place. That the Buddha allows us, in a sense, right? The Buddha allows us to experience even the dark places, and we don't have to try to change that at all. There's certain time, like this time of year, very stressful. Maybe for some people, it's not just stressful, but it can be very lonely, right? It can be very alone. This can be a very lonely time of year, thinking that everybody's supposed to be joyful and happy and everything, but I don't feel that way. And do I have to force myself to feel happy? Well, Zazen, the Buddha says, no, you don't have to. You don't have to. You can appreciate how this is also how we mature in our spiritual practice and our lives in general, that it's okay not to be excited or excitable by things, that you can sit with this experience and savor the darkness that's going on within you, right? In a way that is embraced by the love of the Sangha, by the community, that's embraced by your trust of the Buddha, right? So that darkness, everything has its, in that sense, everything has its place. But I just want to say that with a caveat that I don't know your particular situation. And if you want, we can talk more about that one-on-one. If what I've shared so far doesn't answer that, feel free to reach out to me and we can, explore that together.
Thank you. Yeah, this one in particular didn't feel like it was necessarily related to anything specific, although I have stuff like that. So you answered, they both are helpful, both sides of the coin. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for bringing up that question. I myself, at this time of year, feel that darkness too. And literally, right? The sun is not as bright this time of year. That's earlier, it comes up later. The way the earth is positioned, there's a darkness. And that darkness also enters our minds. And so what do? We respond by putting up lights, right? How many of you have Christmas lights around the house, or you see them around the neighborhood, right? They're there. And we try to do things that improve our mood and stuff like that. But if we're to really go with the flow of the Tao, to enter the Tao is to enter into even the darkness is is part of the flow of the Tao. Sometimes it, you know, it goes down, it goes up, and there's something very calming and peaceful about allowing ourselves to enter into that unexcitable state. And I think we need permission and the reminders that it's okay to be there. Because what happens often in our society, and maybe others as well, is that we think that we have to change something or improve something, we need to take a pill, and maybe we do, but do we have to? And I want to give people the permission to explore the darkness that might be entering into your soul, into your spirit at this dark time of year, both physically dark, but also emotionally dark, to give you permission to explore it and to know that it's only there for a short time. It's going to be there for a short time. And sometimes what happens is if we try to push it away, what happens? It can prolong it, make it longer than it necessarily needs to be. But there's also a kind of a refuge in those dark moments. So just to know we're there as a society, we're there, and these are dark times. We're entering here the solstice, right? 21st of December. We're upon it, and it's the darkest time of the year, and then it gets really cold after that. And so to spiritually prepare ourselves, it's okay, right? Things die. Things are going to die in the external world around us, and also, right, there's parts of ourselves that just get shut off, shut down. And to respect that process. It's a divine kind of process that's happening, and we often try to push it away, and even use spirituality, like I'm supposed to be happy all the time, kind of thinking, or there's nothing should let me down. But especially with Zazen, you've got that permission to enter into and really just explore it, be curious about it. And I'm just saying this for all of us in general, right? Not for any one of us in particular, but just to, you know, if you feel like you have a desire for things to somehow be better than they are, notice that arising of desire within you, and become curious about it. Like, what's that about? Does this, you know, what is this about? I'm not saying we shouldn't run after our desires. I'm just saying just to be curious about it. You know, bring some curiosity. What is this desire? Right? And then we come back, we sit with Sangha, we sit in Zazen, and we can explore that a little bit more with the support of the Sangha.
Thank you very much, Daishin. It's a
Yeah.
great time of the year to be talking about unconditional love in a lot of ways. So, anybody else have burning questions?
Yeah, and really just want to open that invitation again. Once again, if anybody needs to communicate, feel free. I'm available. I'll be traveling, but we can always connect. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Call and response. The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road.
Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road.
Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake to them all.
Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake to them all.
Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through.
Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through.
again.
Thank you.
Travel safely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. You guys keep up your good practice. Yeah, you all, I know everybody's going to be traveling to some degree or another, and whether it's to another state or in your own heart, mind. So be well and stay in touch, and we'll see you guys some of you I'll see in the new year, maybe some before then. And yeah, take good care.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye,
And
Dick.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your practice.
Just one announcement. We're going to have a New Year's Eve gathering here for family, friends, anyone you want to bring. It's a potluck, so bring your favorite vegetarian dish. And we'll have a potluck dinner and conversation, and then we'll probably start sitting zazen maybe around 8 o'clock. We have a sort of bell ringing ceremony that occurs every hour.
What day is that?
It's Saturday, 31st.
Yeah.
And- And will 8 p.m.?
It'll start 6:30, I think,
6:30.
or was it 6?
I can't remember what the email said.
Cool.
Yeah, it's in the email.
It's on.
And so, bring family, and then if you want to sit zazen, you can sit for as long as you want, until midnight. So. And then the fireworks. No. Any
Is
other?
anybody gonna do that? Is that what you did last
People
year?
have.
Yeah. I've done
We
it
didn't,
before.
What,
we
you
did last.
sat
Oh,
zazen
no, I
to-
didn't say it.
Yeah.
I just brought my family and ate, and then I left.
Oh.
Okay, and then we'll have tea and conversation afterward. Right. Let's put our cushions back and bow out.